Hello, everyone, and welcome to live lesson for March the 2nd. This live lesson will cover our intro into our novel. So today, what is due today is kind of looking at the concept of setting and the concept of characterization. So specifically with setting and characterization for John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, it is really important to know, and I'm sure for most of you who've already dived into this, because we're in our first few chapters right now, you've noticed that setting is not always directly stated. So it's really important in terms of the skills we are developing in terms of inferencing. So inferencing is the idea of understanding what the language or what the text is telling us implicitly is what we call it. So not directly at you saying this takes place at this time of year, but based on, let's say, the description of weather, based on the description of the valleys, the mountains, you sort of kind of create this imagery in your head or this visual of where our story is taking place. And that's kind of the skill set that we're really trying to develop and we're really trying to work on through this. So within our lesson of setting and the power of place and sort of how that takes shape and form for the rest of the novel, you're going to notice things within our novel of kind of figuring out based on the language, based on the setting, based on what our characters are doing. What are they pursuing? Where are they going? You start to establish, okay, this doesn't take place in modern day. It doesn't take place necessarily too far back, hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's kind of somewhere in between. And then you start to these questions sort of start to get answered as you continue along. So in our second lesson, so the power of characterization or character, same type of skill is kind of what we are honing in on, this idea of inferencing. What is Kenny like? What are characteristics of Kenny and Lenny, or sorry, Lenny, I'm sorry, of Lenny and George, I apologize. Um, in terms of what kind of people are they? So if they were in front of you, what are adjectives that you would use to describe these characters? Are they um, physically, are they tall? Are they short? Characteristically, in terms of personality, adjectives that you would use such as loyal, such as friendly, such as kind, such as angry, cold, standoffish. Those types of adjectives we use when we're talking about the characterization of a character. And within our lesson, then we start to develop terminology and concepts such as round characters, flat characters. So, how much detail and development is the author putting into these characters? And then started to figure out why. So, you have characters that are much more dynamic and much more developed, and characters that are not. And that should also signal to you, okay, well, how predominant and important are these characters going to be in sort of the diction or the story of our plot, our overall novel. So same thing in a movie, the extras in the background versus your main character, Mark Wahlberg or anything like that. Same type of idea when you're looking at the power of setting as well as the power of characters and characterization. How is the author establishing these in terms of skill sets and inferences as a reader? What do we take from our text and kind of what imagery do we establish? What visualization do we have in our head of these characters? And Of Mice and Men, I have to say it's definitely a classic. Some of you may or may not have come across it before, and it's one of those books it's a quick read, it's a short read, but the imagery has always been John Steinbeck's imagery has always been really successful. And when I used to teach this book face to face with students, and we sort of read together and we read online, I always was so fascinated by students' connection to Lenny and George. These sort of, classic like characters, but then they sort of take on a shape and a personality of their own. So students would read the novel out loud, but they would do so in this really awesome sort of accent for Lenny and George. And these characters kind of became really real for people. And I hope, and it is my expectation really, that if you give the novel enough time and sort of you dive into it, I think it will take on its own kind of way with you as well, where these characters become they become people in our heads, if that makes sense. And then by the end, you're kind of like, oh, that kind of sucks. Um, the book's over, the novel's over, and then you can kind of figure out how you felt about the ending, in general, how you felt about the characters that you're going to meet as the novel continues. And it's sort of this idea of setting, which is really important to our story overall in terms of the different places that the story takes you to, and the way that the different characters you're introduced to and how they play a dominant part in our novel overall in terms of their influence and impact on our two main characters, on our George and Lenny. So very interested to know how you guys kind of take on those different chapters in regards to what you find and the inferences you make. Give it a shot. I think that I've had a lot of students email me already saying I haven't read a book in years. Well, I rest assured, I think that you really will enjoy it. Give yourself a good chapter or two, and I think you're going to be hooked. I think these two characters really bring you along with them in terms of their journey. And just remember, as you are reading, remembering how and when the settings change, how and when or who I should say, um, our characters change, but then the new characters that do come into play and sort of understanding where they fit in the roles of our main characters. So I'm going to leave it at that in hopes that provides a bit more clarity, for the idea of power of setting and power of characters. Continue on with your reading this weekend. And if you have any questions, of course, you know how to get a hold of me. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Happy reading.